welcome you all to this LinkedIn Live session, a precursor to the 8th Annual Sustainability Conference organized by the Center for Responsible Business. This year, our conference theme is accelerating and reinforcing transformative change for societal resilience. What we aim to do is to understand as to how we can move rapidly and efficiently towards adapting and mitigating change, along with effectively achieving positive impacts that can be seen across nature and society. With this, we also want to identify the pathway that that will help us in achieving the impacts. While we sit here and talk about transformation, one of the aspects that often gets missed out is the sector or is the edible oil sector. Within this sector, it's important that we look at the uptake of sustainable palm oil across the various actors and the supply chain itself. Palm oil is the most versatile oil as compared to other vegetable oils. It's very efficient, high yielding, and is able to produce high quantity of oil over small areas of land almost all year round. Promotion and uptake of sustainable palm oil has been an area of research and intervention for our organization, CRB, something that we've been working for more than 5 years now. In order to take this action forward, we've also been collaborating with the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil in the past 4 years. I'm very happy and delighted to have with us Mr. Kamal Prakash Seth, who is the Global Deputy Director Market from RSPO, today with us. Welcome, Kamal. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bhavya. Glad to be here.
So to begin with, Kamal, one of the questions that I want to ask is for the wider audience, could you just give a brief overview about what does the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or RSPO, does, and what it looks at with respect to sustainable palm oil?
Yeah, sure. So RSPO is a not-for-profit international membership-based organization that unites 7 stakeholders across the palm oil supply chain and the supporting stakeholders, namely the growers, the oil palm farmers, the processors, traders, consumer goods manufacturers, banks, financial institutions, environmental and social NGOs. And together, the organization creates sustainability standards for the entire supply chain, which means standards are used to certify plantations, mills, refineries, factories of FMCG companies, as well as the retail outlets of fast-moving consumer goods or quick service restaurants. So that's just a brief snapshot of what RSPO does. As an association, today there are more than 5,000 member organizations in more than 100 countries. And the overall market share of RSPO is about 19%, which means 19% of the world's palm oil is certified by RSPO, which is known as Certified Sustainable Palm Oil.
Thanks, Kamal. It's good to understand RSPO's role. Based on the theme of the conference, could you help and elaborate on what kind of transformation do you see that is required in the edible oil ecosystem in order to build resilience? And also, could you put some light on both the aspects, from the demand and the supply aspect of the edible oil ecosystem?
Sure. I think for the benefit of the audience, I will take a step back, assuming not everyone is familiar with the edible oil sector in India. So India is the world's largest consumer of edible oils. We are also the world's largest importer of edible oils, which primarily means palm oil and soybean oil, along with sunflower. So it's important to understand that India does not produce all the edible oil that we need for 1.4 billion of us. Almost every household has a demand for edible oils, either directly or indirectly, which means every time you order food from outside, most probably it has edible oils, which contains palm oil. Or you use anything between soap, shampoos in the washroom to anything in the fridge like margarines or any kind of ice creams, or in the kitchen, right? So we are the largest buyer of edible oils, most of which is palm oil, of which soybean oil comes from Latin America, Brazil and Argentina, which has obviously very well documented sustainability concerns and issues in the Amazon. The palm oil comes from Malaysia and Indonesia, most of it. And then we have sunflower oil coming from Ukraine and Russia. So if you look at this mix, India, as the largest consumer and importer of edible oil, has a huge responsibility to make sure that this sector is sustainable globally as the largest buyer in the world, but also at home within India, because India also produces oil seeds and oil crops. So soy is also grown in India, so is palm, though it's not sufficient to meet our overall demand of 23.5 million tons. Most of the 23.5 million ton which is imported is palm oil, about 60-70% of it. So coming to the conversation about palm oil, since that's what RSPO has been working on since 2004, the transformation we see lies in the fact that we closed the supply and demand gap for sustainable palm oil. The reality today is that there is more supply of certified sustainable palm oil than the demand for it, which is a great place to be if you look at from a business case point of view, which means that the premiums or any additional price that businesses are willing to pay is not as much for sustainable palm oil that could have been otherwise. The reason there is more supply and less demand still is because some of the emerging markets, which are the largest consumers of palm oil, the largest consumer is Indonesia, followed by India, followed by China. These are the three largest importing countries or consuming countries. India is the largest importer. So if Indonesia, India, and China are not consuming certified sustainable palm oil, it's a concern for the entire world, because then the growers are not incentivized to have sustainable agricultural practices at the plantation level or at the production level. So that's where we see as the transformation. While the more matured markets like North America and Western Europe have progressed to 70-80% uptake of certified sustainable palm oil, we still have a lot to do in the Asian part of the world, mainly in South Asia and Southeast Asia, plus China.
So while talking about the bridging the gap between the demand and the supply, have you identified ways in which we can decrease the gap between the demand and supply as an organization or as somebody who works on sustainable palm oil?
Yeah, I think the number one thing to do is to socialize the business case for this. Why are there 5,000 members of RSPO in less than 17 years now? The reason 5,000 members have become members of RSPO is because they see a clear business case. It's not philanthropy. It's not something which is just written in the books or in a thesis out there, because businesses and NGOs see value in being members of RSPO. So one of the things is to socialize the business case. Actually, there's an organization called Climate Advisors, which did a 7-year study to find out how did the RSPO members perform compared to the non-members on the equity returns. And it found out that close to 25% more equity returns were there for RSPO member organizations. Why does that happen? Because the moment you use sustainability standards and have sustainable sourcing policies, you're making your organization more resilient. Talking about the theme of the CRB conference as well, environmental resilient and social resilience. So for the last almost 2 years now, the world is struggling with the pandemic and all the disruption it has caused in the world, right? Now imagine if you had more companies in India which had sustainable sourcing policies, which would mean that they're not damaging the environment while procuring any agricultural products, for example. So we need to create more and more actions and projects, which first of all socializes the business case, that it's a clear business case, which means for long term, if there are family-led businesses in India, or there are domestic companies in India or multinationals operating in India, need to see it as a 5, 10, 20-year roadmap, that those returns happen not in short term, because you're talking about changing corporate policies, you're talking about changing government policies. So the ROI for those actions, which means if a company comes up with a sustainable sourcing policy, we'll see huge dividends over long term, because the organization will become more resilient and more sustainable. And therefore the equity returns go up, the reputation goes up. The other angle to this is that there are more and more consumers today in India who are demanding for sustainable products. And that is rising exponentially. We do a lot of work with the youth and consumers, with our partners, and we are seeing that in all our studies. So it's a clear business case that needs to be socialized.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll narrow down to the session that we have at the 8th Annual Conference. Your session, the India Sustainable Palm Oil Dialogue, or what we call SPOD India 2021, is focused on shared responsibility for sustainable palm oil production in India. So just for the wider audience and people who are watching it, what exactly is shared responsibility and what it means in case of sustainable palm oil uptake and as an advantage.
Sure. So RSPO, a couple of years back, RSPO members with different working groups, committees got together to say, how do we fill the gap between the supply and demand for sustainable palm oil? So one of the ways RSP is trying to do is by the implementation of shared responsibility rules. By that, what we mean is that everyone along the supply chain is responsible to make sustainable palm oil the norm. So, for example, when growers have to meet one of our principles and criteria 2018 to get certified, why is not every single ton of certified sustainable palm oil sold as certified sustainable palm oil? Because the downstream has not purchased the volumes which the growers have been offering for many years now. So shared responsibility means that as a refiner processor, as a consumer goods manufacturer, as a retailer, as an NGO, as a bank, everyone needs to have policies and mechanisms in place to play their part. So companies should have sustainable sourcing policies aiming for 100% sustainable palm oil over a period of time. NGOs should have projects and initiatives that make sure that they are working towards sustainable palm oil, as well as sustainable finance initiatives by the banks and financial institutions and investors. So that's what we mean by shared responsibility, that it's not just the job of the growers or the farmers to produce sustainably, it's the job of the market and the supply chain as well to buy sustainably. Coming to the session at the CRB conference, the reason we want to focus on sustainable palm oil production in India this year is related to the recent announcement by the government of India. On 18th of August, there was a press release for the National Mission on Edible Oils, specifically for oil palm. And that mission seeks to increase the domestic production of palm oil in India by 4 times in the next 5 years. And a significant budget has been allocated for it as well to support the growers and the farmers who would take a few years to shift from another crop to palm or to start with oil palm plantations. So we want to make sure that when India becomes a larger producer of palm oil, it's doing it in a sustainable manner. So during the session, what we'll be discussing is how can that happen in a systemic manner? As far as RSP is concerned, we have already interpreted our sustainability standard for large growers for India. So we had constituted a working group in 2019, which interpreted the standard for India. So we are ready for that to be used wherever the businesses want to have plantations for oil palm for production, as per the new announcement by the government. RSPO's national interpretation for India can be used. On the other hand, for the oil palm smallholders in India, there is already an independent smallholder standard that we are working with WWF India for the farmers in Andhra Pradesh. So what we are trying to do here is to make sure that whether the farmers who are involved in the palm oil production or the companies involved, they have standards to meet. And we work with them to make sure that they are ready to get certified from a third-party certification body.
Okay. Lastly, like now that you've discussed what the session will look like, I just want to know if you have planned any outcomes or activities post the session based on discussion on shared responsibility and role of each and every actor in promoting sustainable palm oil. What do you think would be the next step once the session is done?
I think the next steps could be a clear roadmap in the next 5 to 10 years, in line with the announcement by the government of India. We will invite experts and speakers from the industry as well as from the NGOs to help us create a kind of a roadmap by the end of the session. We won't cover all the topics because it will be challenging in the limited time we'll have, but at least we should have those ideas in mind on. So for example, right, so if India needs to produce 4 times more or 5 times more crude palm oil in the next 5 years within India, how can we make sure that that's done at not at the cost of the environment, not at the cost of deforestation, and at the same time improve the livelihood of the local communities, of the farmers who are involved in the process? Practically, what it will mean at the ground level is that, for example, a lot of farmers who are producing rice as we speak might be encouraged to move from rice to palm because their income will go up when they move from rice to palm. It is harvested monthly. There are market forces that make sure that the farmers are paid in a fair manner from the mills that they sell to. So what we'll be looking to do by the end of the session is to have a roadmap on how every single drop of palm oil produced in India is sustainable. so that there are no concerns on environmental parameters, there are no concerns on social parameters. As long as we make sure that happens in the next 10 years, we see no concerns as to why India should not strive to become self-reliant in edible oils. Realistically speaking, we are a huge country with a population of 1.4 billion. It is almost impossible that we will stop importing edible oils, even in the next 10 years. It's unlikely because we don't have the agricultural land available. We don't have the water resources and many other things that go into producing edible oils. But what we can strive to do in the next 5-10 years, and in the session we'll be discussing the same, is how can every single drop of edible oil, specifically palm oil, as far as we are concerned, is certified sustainable, is as per the principles and criteria by the standards of RSPO or any other frameworks that are equivalent to RSPO, so that no one is concerned about the sustainability aspects of palm oil production in India.
Okay, thank you so much. That was very helpful, Kamal. This Pod India session that Kamal was discussing about will be held on 20th October from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. I'm urging everyone watching this or who watch it later to please go ahead and register for the session and also for the annual conference. Once again, thank you so much, Kamal, for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, and hope many of the people watching this will join us for the session at the CRB conference.
Yes, looking forward. Thank you so much.